Jack Ma, born on the 10th of September 1964 in Hangzhou, Zhejiang province of China, began his earliest years of learning in a period when China was passing through major cultural and social changes, and education was far from easy for most families, especially for those who, like Jack's parents, belonged to modest backgrounds. When Jack Ma stepped into primary school in Hangzhou, he was not the kind of child who stood out in academics, nor was he the type who impressed teachers with high marks or exceptional discipline. Instead, he was a small, thin boy with bright eyes, full of curiosity but often struggling with subjects many others found simple. His primary school days were filled with challenges, especially mathematics, in which he repeatedly scored poorly, sometimes even failing when others passed comfortably. These shortcomings often made him feel like he was behind everyone else, but instead of breaking his confidence, they slowly taught him perseverance, a trait that would shape his entire future. During his early years in school, Jack experienced a sense of being ordinary, not the smartest, not the strongest, and definitely not the most naturally gifted. But even then, he had something different, an unignorable desire to learn about the world beyond his small classroom. While other children ran around, uninterested in foreign cultures or languages, Jack was fascinated by anything different, anything that showed there was a bigger world outside the walls of Hangzhou. This curiosity started in primary school and became the seed of his later passion for English. Although his family could not afford luxuries, and though China at the time had limited access to foreign media, Jack somehow found himself drawn to the idea of understanding people who were not from his country. He carried this interest with him every day to school, even in subjects where he struggled, his eagerness to understand concepts was visible. Teachers may not have seen him as extraordinary, but his questions always revealed a bigger imagination. His English journey began subtly in those primary school years, long before he had any formal English training. Sometimes he would hear foreign words, written or spoken, and wonder what they meant. Sometimes he would find old magazines or scraps containing English letters and stare at them, unable to read them but still fascinated. These small sparks fueled his mind and helped him see school not just as a place for lessons but as a door to the world. Jack Ma wasn't physically strong either. In primary school, he often got into fights, not because he was aggressive but because he refused to let bigger kids push him around. These fights made him tough, both physically and emotionally, and he learned early that standing up for himself was important, even if he didn't win every time. But more importantly, these experiences gave him the courage he would later use in life. The courage to fail, the courage to try again, and the courage to keep going even when others doubted him. Academically, Jack's primary school journey was full of ups and downs. He was not the top student that teachers praised. In fact, he was more often the student they worried about. He failed many subjects, performed poorly in tests, and often brought home report cards filled with comments highlighting weaknesses instead of strengths. But despite these struggles, his parents encouraged him to continue, reminding him that school was not only about marks, it was about learning, improving, and developing character. And Jack believed that. He may not have been a brilliant student, but he had a brilliant hunger to grow. One of the most meaningful parts of his primary school life was his exposure to tourists in Hangzhou. Although he was still very young, he observed foreign visitors in the city and developed an interest in understanding them. Hangzhou was becoming a tourist destination, and the sight of foreigners walking through the city streets intrigued him deeply. Even though he was just a primary school student, these early encounters shaped his ambitions. He wanted to communicate with people from around the world, and the first spark of this dream ignited during these early school years. It wasn't until later that he began riding his bicycle to the Hangzhou Hotel daily to talk to tourists, but the foundation of this passion was formed while he was still in primary school. Another defining aspect of Jack's early education was resilience. Every time he failed a subject, he promised himself he would do better next time. Every time he couldn't solve a math problem, he reminded himself that the world was bigger than a textbook. His early frustrations with school helped him develop the philosophy that later guided his leadership: failure is simply the first step toward success. Many children who perform poorly in primary school lose confidence, but Jack Ma learned to turn his weaknesses into strengths by working harder, asking more questions, and refusing to quit. His teachers might not have recognized his potential at the time, but the determination he cultivated in those early years prepared him for the many rejections and hardships he would face in adulthood. What makes Jack Ma's primary school story inspiring is not his academic brilliance, because he had none, but his mindset. He grew up in a system that prized high marks, yet he learned to build confidence outside the grading system. He learned that curiosity mattered, that communication mattered, that persistence mattered more than talent. These lessons stayed with him long after he left primary school. The thin, curious boy who sat quietly in a classroom in Hangzhou grew up to become the founder of Alibaba, one of the largest e-commerce empires in the world. But at his core, he always remained the same child who believed that a bigger world existed beyond his village and that curiosity could take him anywhere.